Eugene, because I was trained in science and I am really desirous to know whether God exists, I look to the arguments from natural theology, which I know has gone through a long period of time where they are almost discarded, although coming back a little bit now for various reasons, including fine-tuning. But therefore, I want to go back to look at some of the arguments for God from natural theology, from design, from so-called teleology, to look at the purpose of things, a moral argument. How can we understand these natural theology arguments?
So there are many different arguments for the existence of God. As you said, the design argument, the cosmological argument, the moral argument, and so on. I claim that they all have the same structure. It's not very obvious when you look at these arguments, but actually there is a hidden structure that is common in all of these arguments.
So to go through the arguments first quickly. Tell me what they are,
Okay.
so I have the precision. I know what they are in general, but I want to hear the precision of the argument. Then tell me how they're all the same.
Right. Okay, so let's start with the cosmological argument. One version of the cosmological argument says that, okay, there are many contingent beings like us and other animals.
Contingent meaning may not have existed. They weren't necessarily existing.
That's right. So it could have been the case that we don't exist, but actually we do exist by coincidence. So we are contingent beings. Now, we can ask, why do we exist? And we can appeal to some other contingent beings, saying that our existence was caused by these other contingent beings. And then we can ask, why do they exist? And you can appeal to further contingent beings and so on. And then you end up getting an infinite regress, and you want to stop somewhere. We get annoyed when we get an infinite regress. Actually, not all of us, because Bertrand Russell famously said that the universe is just there, and that's all.
Yeah.
He doesn't mind that the universe is infinitely old and we have infinitely many things. But most people want to stop this regress. And one way of stopping it is to say that there is a necessary God. God exists necessarily, and a necessary being can stop this infinite regress of contingent beings.
Okay, so that's the cosmological argument.
That's
I follow that, and God is the only way to stop the infinite regress of all these causes going back infinitely. If you want to stop it, you have to have a being that's not contingent, a necessary being, and that's what people call God.
That's right.
Okay, how about the other arguments?
The design argument says that we were created by some intelligent designer. It could be a supernatural being. Maybe it's not a supernatural being. Maybe we are created by some intelligent aliens or something. But then we can wonder who created these aliens. Russell rejected this argument because he was convinced the idea that this argument entails an infinite regress. So if you appeal to an intelligent designer, then you have to ask, who created the designer, and you have to postulate the designer of the designer, and so on. And again, we can appeal to God here. God is the only being, arguably, that can stop this infinite regress because God exists necessarily.
Okay, how about the moral argument?
The moral argument is like this. For example, why is it wrong to torture innocent children? And you say, that's because it's wrong to torture people, innocent people. And you might say, why is it morally wrong to torture people? And you say, that's because it causes pain and so on. And you can provide this kind of explanation indefinitely, but you have to stop somewhere. And arguably, God is the only being that can stop this infinite regress of explanation as well, because God is a necessary being who is the moral lawgiver. So all of these arguments has this same structure.
So what does that tell us? If all of the arguments for God have the same structure, basically an infinite regress that it either has to go on infinitely or has to stop. Does that mean there is less force in these arguments because it's basically all just one argument?
I mean, different arguments make different claims, and they are based on different premises, and some of them are controversial and some of them are less controversial. So I don't really endorse all of these arguments, but I think there is something right about these arguments, which is that, again, there is some infinite regress unless you assume the existence of a necessary being that stops this regress.
I think what that does for me is it gives me a very clear choice of either accepting an infinite regress, which is very difficult to accept, or to accept the end of that infinite regress, which is called God, which is also hard to accept.
It is so hard to accept to think that there is a necessary being. I think it's much harder to say that there is an infinite regress and there is no ultimate reality. There is absolutely no metaphysical foundation of reality. I think that's very difficult. And then we can just wonder why are we here if there is no fundamental metaphysical ground?